Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chelius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. Today's podcast is sponsored by AbleDocs, makers of Access PDF for Word and Access PDF Quick Fix, as well as document remediation services. So we thank them for being our sponsor for today's podcast. My name is Chad Chelius, and I am a trainer, author, consultant, PDF remediator, among many other things.
And I'm Dax Castro. I am an Adobe certified PDF accessibility trainer, as well as an accessible document specialist certified by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And we are so excited today to bring to you our premiere episode of Chax Chat, which is a combination of Chad and Dax. We put it together and, Chax is what came out. So welcome. And I hope that you're as excited about this as we are, because we're going to talk about some great things. Chad, the other day you and I were talking about this, and we had a long conversation, and it was really great. And we both sat there and thought, wow, we should be recording this. People can get some good information, right?
Absolutely.
And we thought, what if we did a podcast? So that's kind of how this whole podcast idea came about. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some different topics that we think are important or that have come up during the week. And right now it's going to be a weekly episode. We'll see how that goes. And hopefully it's going to have some good information out of it. So Chad, my first question to you is it's been coming up in a lot of these different PDFs that I keep seeing, mostly from Office Suite documents. And it's this artifact tag. Not a designation, but an actual tag, like you would have a paragraph tag. What the heck?
Yeah. I can't speak for Microsoft or anything like that. I guess the first thing that we should talk about, just real briefly, is like, what is an artifact? Right. And
good idea. Good idea.
As somebody, so like I come very much from the design side of things. So a lot of the documents that I remediate are, brochures, they're catalogs, they're very highly designed products. And, we as designers often use imagery. And for lack of a better description, sometimes we use imagery simply for aesthetic reasons, right? That they're pretty pictures, oftentimes we'll put a picture of a girl sitting on a park bench, has nothing at all to do with the content of the product, but it's a pretty picture nonetheless, and, pleasant for us who are sighted readers. When you're remediating a document, most of us already know that all figures need to have alternate text applied to them to describe the image in its context. And the challenge with those pretty pictures, if you will, is that they really have no value, right?
Right.
So the purpose of artifacting an object is to simply say to the assistive technology, do not read this object. Right.
Well, what's interesting, though, Chad, is that some people will say, well, there's this argument out there that, well, wait a minute, if I get to see it as a sighted person, why are we choosing to refuse to let a person see it as a blind person? And I will tell you that is a great observation until you're using a screen reader. And you have to hear every single piece of graphic in that document. And it goes back to not understanding what the experience is for that user. I just saw something on LinkedIn today that was a post about they've got this great new thing that is a backpack for blind people that acts as a guide dog. And one of the people that commented on that, it was actually Sam Evans from IAAP. She commented on it and said, "Who said that blind people don't want guide dogs? Why? How did that become a thing?" Right. And I thought, wow, that's a really good point. We assume that blind people would rather not have a guide dog and be independent on their own. But I think that's an ableist point of view. Right.
Sure.
And so while I agree that there is an argument where, like in a children's story, if somebody had a lot of illustrations in a children's story, they really are decorative. They do help, kind of give a visual element to the story, but they are decorative. But I can see making a point to describe all of that alt text in that instance, right?
Yeah.
And if I have an icon that's the help icon with the little, question mark or whatever, I don't need to hear that 50 times in the document.
And like when I teach accessibility, I teach classes to companies throughout the US, and the remediation process is not black and white. And that's part of the challenge that a lot of us face. In some ways, I wish it were very, very implicit. It's like, this is what you always do. But, if you give a document to 10 people and say, remediate this document, you're going to get 10 different results back. That is just the fact of the matter. There's no getting around that. And so you're right. And we are trying to, listen, I believe very strongly in what we do. Right. I mean, the idea that I'm making a document accessible to all users, whether sighted, non-sighted, mobility, the whole list of users is really close to my heart. It's really important to me. But as a sighted user, we try to consider what a non-sighted user would want.
Right.
But, we're just guessing sometimes, right. And so we're trying to make educated guesses as we go along, following the standards, following the requirements that we're going for. So anyway, I know a little bit of
long tangent. Right? Yeah.
So back to the artifact. We know why we want to artifact things, but when you artifact something in a document, that element is now removed from the tagging structure. Right. And because the tagging structure is what assistive technology uses to read your document.
Yep.
Now, getting back to your point about it was a Word document, right?
Right. I've seen it in PowerPoint really mostly is because a lot of times you have a lot of decorative elements, right? You've got boxes with colors and fills and lines, shapes, all this decorative elements, right? And you open that panel and you mark it as decorative, or you've got a box with text in it. You would assume that InDesign will just remove it from the tags tree and just leave the text. PowerPoint wraps it in an artifact tag, which really isn't a tag, right?
No. It's a container, right? It's a container. And the problem is I always think of it as they only went halfway, right? That they identified that the object should be an artifact, but then they put it in the tags tree.
Right. Exactly.
And so you're like, wait a second, guys, this is not helpful because I still need to go through all of them and artifact them, which, by the way, you cannot just artifact them.
Right.
Wait,
no, what do you mean? What do you mean?
So, and I'm going off memory, right? If I remember correctly, you open up the artifact tag, click on the content object and say change tag to artifact.
Yep.
I don't think it does it.
No, it doesn't.
Until you rename the tag, then it finally lets you artifact it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So what I was doing is I'm going, okay, I mark it. And this happens sometimes with other tags where you'll right click on something, you'll do change to artifact, and it just blinks and nothing happens. The tag doesn't go away. Nothing changes. And I go in and look in the content tab, right? And it shows that it is artifacted. So then I just delete the object out of the tags tree because I know in the content panel, it's listed, it's already designated as an artifact. That step of removing it from the tags tree gets skipped. And I'm like, wait a minute, what the heck?
It's just a little dangerous though, too, right? Because I always preach in my classes, do not delete things from the tag tree. It's not that simple. So, it's a conundrum and very challenging. And
it'd be great is if Acrobat, Adobe, if you're listening to this podcast, thank you, first of all. And second of all, will you please make a way for me to select or search for tag types to set designations? If I can search for every artifact tag or every H1 or every H2, and maybe not H1 or 2 is probably a bad example, but a specific tag and give it a property, be able to edit all of the properties, that would be super. Because I can think of lots of uses where I want to select all of a paragraph tag and turn it into a list tag because I want to be able to everywhere in the document, 150 different tags are paragraph tags instead of lists, right?
Yeah. And yeah, Adobe, if you're listening, I have a laundry list for you. It's
good podcast fodder, right? I mean, we're gonna have podcast topics for a long time. So
well, it's funny because a few versions ago in Acrobat DC, they added the ability to rename multiple tags at a shot.
Yep. And I love it. I use it for lists all the time.
I love it, but I couldn't believe I was excited about it. like that's like a 1993 feature. You know what I mean? Like I remember back in the early 90s when PageMaker only gave you one undo. Right. And then I think it was Court came out and gave you unlimited undos.
Right. You're like, whoa,
oh my gosh, this is crazy. So like when Acrobat gave us that feature, I'm like, this is cool, but I can't believe I'm actually excited about it, you know?
Yeah. But I heard a rumor, and I can't say where I heard it from, but I heard a rumor that possibly in PDF UA 2, there is going to be the introduction of an artifact tag, an actual tag. Now, do no one quote me. I'm just giving scuttlebutt. This is water cooler talk, but that Office might have preemptively started adding these, which is like, okay, great. I get that, but we're not there yet. And the screen readers don't understand it. No one understands it yet. So why start doing it now? And so who knows? I mean,
I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like you're just going to complicate the tags tree. You know, I kind of like that. Once I artifact it, it's out of here. I don't have to deal with it, but that's my opinion, right?
So, hey, I wanted to mention, you and I were on the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, the ADS, the Accessible Document Specialist Committee, to develop this test. And, it was so great when they tapped me to be part of that group. I want to talk to you a little bit about, some of the behind the scenes of what happened, just so that, our listeners can get an idea of what this test went through before it was actually released. Tell me, how'd you feel about, being on part of that group?
Well, I mean, it was really extensive. And I think the IAAP did a great job at kind of, and I'm not saying this because they included me, but I think they did a really good sampling of a variety of remediation specialists, because I mean, there was you, there was me, there were a bunch of other great folks in there from different points of view, if you will, or different industries,
Well, we have people from EDU and, people from the education sector and people who are, different focuses totally. So,
And it was good because, people would bring up a topic and they'd be like, oh, this is how it is. And I'm like, well, wait a second, in InDesign, blah, blah, blah. So I felt like you and I brought, we represented a different community where people were affected and variables were included in there. Creating the questions, it was great, but it was hard, man. Hard writing questions. Oh my gosh.
For those people listening, we were asked to write about 10 different questions on a variety of the different ways the document, the segments were kind of compartmentalized. And then those questions were actually scrutinized and we had to come up with the answers too. And there were parameters about how the answers can be formatted and what can be said. And it was, honestly, it was the best part of my, my week when I knew I had one of those meetings coming up, because how many times do you be able to sit down and talk about for 15 minutes a certain question or the validity of whether or not an LBL tag is required, or whether, who's going to understand that, I don't want to really talk about any of the questions, but the different nuances of some of these questions was great. And it really helped me ensure that I knew the right thing. And there were a couple of questions in there that I didn't know. And so I was happy to hear those answers. being part of the team, Duff Johnson, who's PDF Association CEO, was part of that team, So it's not like it was just a bunch of users, and not that there's anything wrong with having users, but there were some great minds in there, Damien Sayan who's in our Facebook group.
Damien Sayan, great guy.
And so it was really great. And I really looked forward to it. I think the test, we had to go back at the end. Remember at the end where you had to score the probability that you thought someone was going to get these questions right. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, again, really challenging because you had to put yourself in the position of what were the parameters, like a 1 to 2 year, like 1 to 2 year,
1 to 2 year user,
right? And so like you look at a question and be like, okay, like, is this kind of fundamental? Like if you've done this for 1 to 2 years, you should definitely know this. Some of them, we really debated on, and even the questions, there were some that we debated on as well. I mean, we all came from different angles, and some of them, I'm just going to put it out there, we did not all agree on. Right. You know what I mean? Like I left the table and I'm like, had a little bit of chip on my shoulder. I'm like, that's not right. But it's just part of the process. And it was really, I learned a lot personally, you know what I mean? Like even I, somebody who's been doing this for 10 plus years, right. I was like, oh, that's a really, really great point, and I just loved, working with everybody. It was fantastic.
It was, and I will say this, that, I feel like the ADS is a great litmus test. If you've passed that test, you really do have a good foundation of document accessibility. And as an employer, I would feel confident if somebody came to me with that certification that they know how to do their job at a competent level. I really feel like it was a great test, because there wasn't before this test anything out there that kind of said, and I get this question all the time from people on LinkedIn who say, hey Dax, I want to be, I want to get certifications. People are telling me that they don't believe what I'm saying. I need something to back up what I know. And before this ADS, there really wasn't anything that was comprehensive. I mean, Rob Haverty does a Train the Trainer, PDF accessibility trainer course. Last year, he did it online. I think the year before, he did it at Accessing Higher Ground, which is a conference in Colorado. It's a great course. But that's really the closest thing I think from a document standpoint. So, hey, I was trolling Twitter the other day, and I want to do a segment called "What's on Twitter" or "Who's on Twitter." I feel like that'd be a good thing to do. I stumbled across this guy, right? And this guy, he does A1. So his Twitter handle is at A11YRHYMES. So A11Y rhymes. And he does these tweets that are just funny. And this one says, I have a joke about accessibility. Don't worry, it's not a bore. To get to the punchline, read more, read more, read more, read more. And all the read mores, there's like 100 read mores all in a line, right? It's just a funny visual, a funny little joke. He's got some, let's see, it's another one here that he's got. A poster hung up in a school, clip art as a standard to make it cool. Yellow text wrote on white. How can anybody read this shite? So it's funny. So if you have a chance, man, go to, they're good. They're dad humor. A lot of them are dad humor kind of jokes, but with an accessibility bent. So I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, and as part of what we do, I now look at accessibility all the time, right? And I'll give you a quick example. I was sitting in a coffee shop last year, well, before COVID, right? And I noticed there was a guy standing at the front door of the coffee shop, like really close to the door. And I kind of, didn't really pay too much attention. Then like 5 minutes later, I looked again and he's in the exact same spot. And so I got up and I opened the door. Here he was disabled. And he literally could not stand up on the step and open the door towards him at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And it just, it makes me feel so ignorant sometimes, like we take all of these things for granted. And I'm like, man, you really need a ramp here to help people, and another quick example. I saw a video that somebody posted. A man in a wheelchair was trying to get into his car. Car happened to be a Tesla.
Oh, geez.
He used the summon feature to back the car out of the space for him so he could get into it. It was, I said, now that is an accessibility feature.
There you go. Right.
Yeah. Oh my
gosh. I want that just as a non-disability.
Oh, I know. Right.
Just really like beep. Right? I was in a auto store, and I come out and this truck has parked so close, and I'm a big guy, right? And he parked so close I couldn't get in. It was a giant truck. The guy was an older gentleman. He had parked out from his side far enough away from the car next to him so that he could get out. But in essence, had blocked me in. I went back in, asked him to move. He was really gracious about it, came out and moved. So, it is a thing, and as accessibility advocates, I really feel like it goes beyond my PDF documents. It really goes beyond. I've grown so much compared to when I started my journey so long ago, in my awareness of people's ability to I'm more aware of how I speak. I did a session at CSUN on accessible infographics. Right. And this is a visual thing. We're how to design more accessible infographics. And I got an email back from somebody who had attended the session and said, hey, I want to let you know, I got a lot out of your session. I happen to be completely blind, but I was able to follow along with what you said. I took some great notes, and I'm going to give it to my team so that they can create more inclusive and more accessible infographics. And I thought, wow. How great is that? And not that I did something amazing, but I was more conscious about how I described things, making sure that I was not just saying over here, or up here, or, just being more descriptive about when you click on the object, box, or, different things, so that people with different ways to digest that information would get more out of it. Right. And it's those types of awareness that I think as you do this long enough, it just starts to become who you are. Yep.
You're absolutely right.
So I wanted to ask you, so what are your favorite accessibility tools? I know I've got a few, but what are yours?
So probably at the top of the list, my favorite accessibility tool is PDF Go HTML.
I'm right there with you.
It is, for more reasons than, I just think it's fantastic. It reminds me of read mode in your web browser.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sure.
Because I use that all the time. Get all this stuff out of my way. Just show me the article. Let me read the content. But PDF Go HTML is great because it shows you the order. It shows you structure. It allows you to identify problems. Like I've had a problem with a table before,
right?
With merge cells, and I kept getting the error on that table, and I'm going through, unfortunately, kind of cell by cell, and I viewed it in PDF Go HTML, and I was like, boom. There it is. I could identify the problem. I knew which one it was, went in and fixed it, and it was great. So yeah, love PDF Go HTML.
And that's by Callus, right? CALLAS.
Callus software. Yep.
Yeah. So if you guys Google that, just Callus PDF Go HTML, right? That's the way it.
Yep. It is free. It's a free plugin. Is it Mac and Windows? Do you remember, Dax?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up, but I know I use it on my PC for sure.
I'm trying to find it really quickly.
HTML 2.0, and download. It is.
I think it is Mac and Windows.
Yeah, you know what? You have to go into the GitHub. They send you an email, but I do believe it is Mac and Windows, and it works really well. I use it because you know what? I don't have time to sit and inspect every single cell. It's like you said, especially in tables, when your table structure inside the view, when you go into view table, the table editor inside Acrobat,
Yeah.
If your table structure is irregular in lots of different ways, it's all screwy. You can't click on the right cell to get to what's going on. So then you're searching for the right TD in the tags tree. And you're like, which one is it? All I have to do is open up the Callus software, figure out what cell is out of order or which extra one I've got or which one I'm missing, and go into the tags tree and add it. It works really well. I agree. I think, I would say my favorite accessibility tool is NVDA.
Good call.
I will tell you that I think this is the tool most people do not use.
Yeah.
Because they're scared. They don't understand how to use a screen reader to be able to go in and test a document.
Well, and here's the reality, Dax. Like, I think the misconception is it's software like any other piece of software, and you need to learn how to use it. Everybody thinks you can just kind of open it up and start reading. And you and I know it is not that easy. You are much better at using NVDA than I am. But even for me, I have to kind of remember it's all about, somebody said to me one time that for a non-sighted user, their keyboard is their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they, when they're reading a document, they're using their keyboard to navigate it.
Right.
So,
right.
I think we all need to remember that. And so just like any other software, you need to actually learn how to use it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing that I use it most for is to test my tables, right? To understand how, because I think people don't understand that you put stuff inside a table, it doesn't always get read the way you think. NA/N/A, you put dash in a blank cell, JAWS is going to say dash. NVDA is going to ignore it altogether. Right. And then understanding the differences between those is really important, especially the thing in my industry, in the engineering industry, we do a lot of data with numbers, and people will say at the top in a table, the title of a table, say dollars and billions. Right. So, and then the table has dollar symbols in every one of the cells, and it'll say dollar symbol 1.2.
Right.
Because they think it's 1.2 billion. The problem is a screen reader is going to say $1.20. And so they don't get that the screen reader doesn't have the context. But if you take out the dollar symbol, it just says 1.2. And then you've already told the user that it is billions is your base. So they get a really good and even user experience. Go ahead.
So do you artifact all the dollar signs?
Yeah. Or, well, what we try to do in that case, we have control over the source. So we tell in our company, we have
good
for how to make accessible tables. And so they follow that SOP, and we just deal with that.
Which is the right approach.
Right.
I always tell people, you got to think of accessibility at the beginning, not at the end.
Yes.
Right.
Totally,
you just proved that point. Exactly.
No, absolutely. And I tell people accessibility is about 20% of additional work if you do it as you go. If you do accessibility at the end, it's like 70% more work because you're having to go back and redo things individually. Imagine you've got a table that has 200 cells in it, a 20 by 10, and you've got dollar symbols in every one. You'd have to artifact each one, even if it only took you a second or two. That's a crazy amount of time. So
you and I both know too often companies are like, okay, we're finished with this product. And then it's like, oh, by the way, make this accessible.
Yeah, of course.
And it's like, oh my gosh, that's a podcast in and of itself.
I agreed.
But the other thing I wanted to mention, you were talking about the tables, and a question that I get all the time, which is another good podcast discussion. People say, how is a table read by a screen reader? And I say, it's not.
What?
It's not.
Okay.
The screen reader just doesn't read the entire table for you.
Oh, that's true.
The user has to navigate the table just like you and I as a sighted user do.
Right.
Right.
Because it announces how many columns and rows. It'll say table, 8 columns, 5 rows.
And then it stops.
Well, now if you're in read mode inside NVDA or JAWS, where it's insert down arrow, it will actually start reading one cell left to right continuously. But here's the thing. Who reads a table that way? Not me. I don't read a table left to right as going around like you'd read text. So normally they'll stop the screen reader and then they'll get to it, or they press T for table, which is a shortcut key in NVDA and JAWS, right? And then they'll start navigating the different columns and rows, right? So again, it goes back to understanding how a person using a screen reader natively actually uses a screen reader. Chad, this has been amazing, dude. This has been so great. I've been so glad we've been able to kind of capture this stuff because, these are conversations you and I have had over the course of the last, a month and a half or so. And, I really think there's some valuable information here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many conversations have you and I had where we just kind of wax philosophical about, the challenges of PDF remediation? So totally. I hope other people will enjoy this. And, I'd love to see everybody's feedback. And if there's something that you'd like to hear us talk about on the podcast, please put it in the comments, on the site.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And anything we talk about we're going to have, should be a transcript below this podcast. So all of our text will be captured. And anytime we mention a piece of software or some place to go or some website or somebody's feed, we're going to post those links in the transcript. So don't feel like you've got to try to listen to them or re-listen to them and write them down, but feel free to listen to our podcast as many times as you want. Also, join our Facebook group. So we have a Facebook group called PDF Accessibility. We have over 1,000 members, Chad. Can you believe it? It's crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you and I are both going to be speaking at Creative Pro Week, which is May 17th through the 21st. And I'm doing PDF accessibility, or I'm doing accessibility for InDesign and PowerPoint. And then you're doing, what's your topic?
I'm doing Acrobat accessibility. I'm also doing InDesign to HTML. I mean, these are not awesome. Accessibility related, right. but InDesign to other formats.
But InDesign to HTML really is about accessibility too, right? Because
in some ways, yeah,
HTML is an accessible format. And for another podcast, definitely we'll talk about the validity of whether PDF should even exist at all. So stay tuned for that. And then, so that is creativeproweek.com. And then you've got LinkedIn learning courses, right? On LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Yeah. I started doing, I've been doing LinkedIn for quite some time, but one of the courses that came out of what I do is PDF accessibility. Uh-huh. And so I'm on, I think, my third edition of the PDF accessibility course. And I think I left some old ones up there because for people who are using older versions of Acrobat.
Right.
And then of course I have advanced accessibility as well. So,
and I send people to your stuff all the time for forms, because I think your videos on accessible forms is a really good video to get people started. So, definitely I kudos to you for those.
Thanks, Dax.
Yeah. So, and then I'm speaking at SMPS Build Business on accessibility. So if you're in the architectural engineering construction world, you know about SMPS Build Business every year. It's a great conference about things that relate to the engineering, architectural, and construction world. And I will be presenting how accessibility affects your proposals and deliverables. And so I'll be giving some good topics on how to win more proposals using accessibility as a key feature, and how to build in accessibility into your budget so that you can appropriately price your job.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. And then finally, I want to thank, IAAP is a great organization. I know we talked about it in this podcast. I'm a member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Chad, you were on the committee, and, I really think that it's a great organization if you want to rub elbows with other people in the community and get some great certifications and get they have some great body of knowledge. So the companion that was created to go with the course for the accessible document specialist and their CPAC certification, they have a body of knowledge that is, 15 or 20 pages of real great accessibility references. So I would definitely check that out. All right. Well, Chad, we did it. Our first podcast. What do you think?
I think it was awesome. I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks. And I'm looking forward to doing more.
All right, guys, thank you so much. This is Chad and Dax, and we are wishing you an amazing journey on your accessibility adventures, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.
See you guys.